Thank you so much to everyone who's joining us today. My name is Jené. I'm the co-host of the WCAPS Climate Change Working Group. I'm going to be moderating today's event for our first in a series of climate career events. We hope these series will build a stronger sense of how to find and explore careers within the climate space. Our WCAPS Climate Change Working Group mission is to create a space for women of color in climate-related discussions and initiatives. Our goal is to maintain a platform where women of color will build discussions on climate-related issues, while additionally building a network where organizations and experts in the field can work hand in hand to share solutions on how best to save and heal our planet. Before we begin, I'd like to read a land acknowledgement that is a formal statement that seeks to recognize and respect Indigenous peoples as original stewards of the land, of their land and the land that we currently reside on, as well as recognize the enduring relationship that exists between the Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories. We do this to express gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory we reside on and to honor the Indigenous people who have been living with and caring for their land since ancestral times. Recognizing them also means acknowledging the historical and ongoing genocide of Indigenous peoples and the ways in which we benefit from and contribute to violence towards Indigenous peoples. Naming the original and current stewards of the lands we live on is a first step towards making reparations. Washington, D.C. notably sits on the ancestral lands of the Anacostans, who are also documented as Nacotchtank, as well as the neighboring Piscataway and Pamunkey peoples. And apologies for any flawed pronunciations there on my part. We believe the work we do in sessions like these is part of our ongoing responsibility to acknowledge and address the ongoing harm towards Indigenous people. It is also part of our ongoing work towards a society that is more just and equitable. It is also worth pointing out that the UN's Climate Change Conference, COP27, is currently taking place in Egypt. This, of course, is a place for world leaders to gather and set climate goals, but many are excluded, and this includes marginalized groups and protesters. While it's an important space to set agreed upon goals, many argue that leaders are not going far enough with their targets. And the Egyptian government and its supporters are also accused of greenwashing, that is promoting the space as environmentally friendly while human rights abuses are taking place. And this especially includes the maltreatment of political prisoners. We hope events like ours will offer an alternative, however small, for those excluded, marginalized, or morally opposed to events like COP27. Back to our topic at hand. Today is our first Climate Career Series webinar. We hope to share multiple entry points to careers that support and build awareness of climate change issues, as well as build stronger policies and systems to protect our world. In this session, you will see a Q&A box at the bottom where you can share your questions, comments, and ideas during the conversation. We'll try and answer as many questions at the end as possible. We encourage you to drop as many questions as you can. Before we start, I'm so honored to introduce our wonderful speaker today, Ms. Natalie Unwin-Kuruneri. Natalie is the Senior Director of the Academic Initiatives at the Columbia Climate School. She's responsible for building out key student and alumni affairs offices for the school and translating organizational priorities into comprehensive, concrete, and collaborative services guided by best practices in higher education. Previously, she worked in the private sector with a focus on learning and development and project management. She has worked internationally on projects ranging from corporate responsibility in China to capacity building for women's micro-enterprises in Zambia. She holds a Master's of Public Administration from Columbia University's School of International Public Affairs, a Master of Public Affairs from Sciences Politiques, and a Bachelor of Arts from George Washington University. Thank you so much, Natalie, for being here. We know that pursuing a career in climate change can take on a variety of different forms. It can be policy, technology, economics, arts and culture, advocacy, academia, research, etc. There are so many different ways to pursue a career in climate change. Some people fall into jobs that intersect with climate change, while others take a more traditional approach. The focus of this conversation today with Natalie is understanding green academic careers that blend research in physical and social sciences education, and practical solutions to help guide the world towards a path of sustainability. In this conversation, we will also explore Natalie's journey to her current role as the Associate Director of Academic Initiatives at Columbia's Climate School. Thank you again, Natalie, for joining us today. It's such an honor to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Are you ready to start?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. First question for you is, could you please tell us more about your journey into the climate space and what led you to the world of academia?
Definitely. I'd say my journey to higher education was not linear. I'm definitely one of the people that fell into their careers, like you mentioned. But I'd say that generally over the course of my career, I followed my interests, and that aligned well with the timing of opportunities. Looking back, I see, my interests and values were really shaped by my parents. My mom is British and my dad is Zimbabwean, and both of them worked for the UN. And so I grew up being exposed to different cultures and people and ways of living. My dad grew up in a rural part of Harare where resources were scarce. And so he always taught us not to waste things like food and to take care of our belongings because they were meant to last a while. My mom was always adamant about conserving water and energy and recycling. So I'd say that really early on, I had values of environmental conservation and thoughtful consumption instilled in me. As an undergrad, I studied sociology and psychology because I thought the subject matter was interesting. And to be honest, I was a little slightly intimidated by math and science. But I always knew I wanted to do work that had a bigger impact in the world. I worked in the private sector, as you mentioned, for the first few years of my career, doing project management, learning and development. Decided I wanted to go back to graduate school to study policy and public administration. And as a grad student, I had the opportunity to explore new interests in corporate social responsibility, microenterprise development, global energy and policy and water. And I took part in some really interesting projects overseas. I worked with the women's microenterprise in Zambia, which taught widows with HIV/AIDS how to crochet discarded plastic bags into beautiful handbags and laptop cases and other products as an income generating activity. And so I saw firsthand how a pollutant like plastic could be reused and repurposed for economic good. So I'd say all of this led me to start thinking about job prospects that had an environmental component to them. I had learned about the Earth Institute at Columbia when I was a student there, and I graduated in the midst of the financial crisis. And so it was one of the places that I targeted to look for work. And I was lucky to be in the right place at the right time as a new program in sustainable development was launching. And so I started as an intern, and my role transformed over the years to managing that program, creating new sustainability focused professional development trainings and resources for students and alumni, and helping to launch a field-based course on on the environment and peace building in the Middle East. And so I'm now working to take that experience managing programs and projects to building out these offices of student and alumni affairs at the Columbia Climate School, which is the first of its kind and the newest school at the university in over 25 years.
Thank you so much. That's so fascinating. I really love your emphasis on the nonlinear part of it. You brought your values growing up, and you brought that to your life, and you found new interests and found different ways to apply them. I think that's important to remind people that you can still find your path. It's important for me to learn anyways. Great. Our next question is, having spent so many years working with students interested in green careers, what advice would you give to members of our audience who are students trying to crack into the climate career space? And what sectors do you see having the most opportunities?
Great question. The climate and sustainability space is really broad. So there are a lot of entry points. You mentioned some of them in your intro. So it really depends on your interests and skills. I'd say first and foremost, it's important to figure out which area to focus on, whether it be energy, policy, circular economy, food, finance, health, and where your strengths can be best applied. This can definitely be overwhelming because there's a lot out there. So I think doing that initial research and staying informed on the topic that you choose and what's happening, what developments there are in the field is important. Signing up for newsletters. Bloomberg has a great green newsletter that I subscribe to and really like. LinkedIn is also good to use in terms of connecting with professional networks and to following thought leaders and organizations that you're interested in. Once you identify that focus area, I think talking to people working in those spaces and looking at job titles, employers, and salaries is important. You want to take note of what skills are needed, and you may find that you already have some transferable skills or that you need to gain additional specialized knowledge to be competitive for jobs in that field. And if you do decide to go back to school, there are many programs out there to choose from. Columbia, where I work, is a leader in sustainability education and has nearly 20 years of experience overseeing programs in this space. There are degrees at the undergraduate, graduate, and PhD level, as well as certifications. They range from intensive one-year programs to part-time programs that can be taken over the course of several years. And, in terms of topics, you can focus on climate and society, environmental policy, sustainability management, water, finance, and many more. In terms of opportunities, I'd say that on a macro level, demand for climate knowledge is growing across the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. Governments need to assess risks that climate change poses to their communities and to figure out how to make them more resilient. Companies, of course, want to stay profitable. They need to understand the risk to their supply chains and also to their investments. And they also need to respond to regulations and reporting requirements that impact their ability to do business. So I think the private sector is where you will see the most growth. Looking at alumni data from Columbia's programs, the majority of them are working in the private sector, over 60%, followed by the public sector and then nonprofit. And if you dig into specific programs, that private sector number can be as high as 80%. So that might be just where people are choosing to work or where the opportunities are, or both. But with the Inflation Reduction Act, I think that's going to likely accelerate job growth in the private sector. A recent analysis of the bill that was done by UMass Amherst estimated that the climate, energy, and environmental investments are going to create 9 million jobs over the next decade, which is nearly 1 million jobs annually. So, and it also includes provisions for environmental justice. And though many critics say that doesn't go far enough, it is a step, I think, in the right direction. In terms of specific areas, I think that clean energy is going to see a lot of growth. The burning of fossil fuels was responsible for nearly 90% of greenhouse gas emissions in 2020, according to the EPA. So reducing emissions for electricity, heat, and transportation is a really key part of keeping the rise in global temperatures below 1.5 degrees. But it's not easy. It's going to require utilities, government, manufacturing, lenders, and investors. So I think you will see jobs, expand in the energy financing, equipment manufacture, installation and maintenance, policy, strategy, you name it. Another area to look at is the climate tech space. And this includes technologies that are focused on mitigation, so those that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and remove emissions from the atmosphere, as well as technologies that enable adaptation to an altered climate. And I think both of these areas were already growing and should see a boost from the IRA.
That's great. I love hearing about, especially the private sector having increased demand for climate knowledge. That's a little bit of cause for optimism.
Yeah.
I also loved your point about networks, and everyone here in this audience is already taking a step towards that, right? They're here, they're gaining knowledge, and I hope that people of our audience can either join our listserv or reach out to other people, other members of the audience, and grow that network. Because reaching out and getting knowledge from people can be so helpful.
Definitely, and feel free to reach out to me too on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect with people and do that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's wonderful. All right, next question would you say academia is one of the spaces where there is place for opportunity for career growth?
I'd say yes. Columbia launched the Climate School in 2020. Stanford followed with its School of Sustainability in 2021. Harvard recently received $200 million to launch the Salata Institute for addressing the climate change crisis. And I expect more universities will be building out their own programs to meet the growing and really urgent need for people who can help solve these existential problems of climate change and biodiversity loss. And universities will need people to build and implement and manage those programs. So I think it's definitely a growing space and an interesting one.
Great, that's so good to know. And you've written about sustainable education. Could you first please define what you mean by sustainable education, and also tell us how sustainable education offers opportunities to bring in more diversity in the workplace, please?
Sure. When talking about sustainability education, I'm talking about an interdisciplinary education that incorporates the natural and social sciences and is focused on applied problem solving through the lenses of society, economics, the environment, and equity. In terms of sustainability education and its impact on workplace diversity, the paper that I contributed to specifically looked at whether programs like Columbia's undergrad program in sustainable development attracted more diverse students than other more traditional STEM programs. And so the hypothesis was that interdisciplinary programs with strong STEM components might engage and retain more diverse students through project-based learning approaches and exposure to issues that students experience in their own communities. And so we compared demographics for the Sustainable Development Program to the university more broadly, and also to STEM statistics at the national level. And we found that the Sustainable Development Program was more gender diverse than Columbia College in General Studies as a whole, with more female representation than male. At the time, we didn't have non-gender conforming information available. The ethnicity data of the program indicated that it was matching and in some cases exceeding the diverse populations of Columbia's undergraduate student body as a whole, especially looking at Latinx and African Americans. And this was without any targeted outreach around diversity. And so this indicates that the curriculum and sustainability education programs may attract more diverse students, given the interdisciplinary and applied nature. And as an extension of that, the result is a more diverse workforce with critical STEM knowledge. And studies show that diverse workforces are more efficient, more creative, and better at problem solving. And to address the climate crisis, we need those sorts of people. We need problem solvers who understand the Earth's natural systems, but also the social infrastructure to enact change. The paper was exploratory, but the findings I think were really interesting and definitely lend support to our internal focus and efforts to advance diversity in the student population.
That's amazing work. Having and supporting more viewpoints, more backgrounds is the only way to go forward, right? It's such important work. And I love the incorporation of the natural and social sciences. I'm biased. I have a background in social science, so I think that they pair very well. And this is our last formal question. So I again encourage everyone to drop questions in the chat, but last question for you from me is, what role can or does academia play in climate change activism?
I think it plays an important role. First, it can provide the knowledge base upon which students can build their advocacy campaigns. I think academia can lend support to student activism on climate change by providing the space for students to connect with each other, with faculty, and with researchers to get funding, and to work collaboratively on issues that they care about. And, liberal arts institutions like Columbia are in theory, support free speech or space for speech of all kinds, although they're left-leaning, at least in my experience. But these are exactly the places where students can and should use their voices. And so, students across the country and on Columbia's campus have and continue to hold the feet of administrators to the fire when it comes to things that they care about, like divestment from fossil fuels, which Columbia did after several years. I think it was 2017, but it was after concerted effort from the schools, make a commitment to divest from thermal coal and to not purchase from publicly traded oil and gas companies.
Yeah, absolutely. Activism, it's a muscle. Using your voice, you need to plant that seed early and practice. And sometimes those networks, stay with us for a long time, which is really lovely. All right. So thank you, first of all, for answering my questions and the questions from our side. I'm going to now open it up to the chat. And I'll give you our first question. What are some funding and scholarships opportunities that you know of that are available to foreign students, for master's and PhD students looking to go into the climate field in the US? And sub-question, are there any specific criteria students would need to fill to be considered strong candidates?
Okay, great question. I will say I don't work in the financial aid space, so my knowledge in that area is not super robust. I know that for students, for international students, they're often directed to private loans. That's just the way that it is. I think Columbia does have fellowships available for students, ranging from 10 to 20. It's not dedicated to international students, but there definitely are fellowships available to partake in an education here. The second part of the question was around the what makes someone like a competitive application? Is that
competitive, or are there any just basic criteria that make you a strong candidate?
Got it. I'd say generally looking at the application process is looked at, it's a holistic application. So, looking at passion for sustainability and climate change and understanding of the program and how that can help you reach your goals is incredibly important. The programs don't rely on metrics like the GRE because that is not it's not a fair representation of how students are going to perform in the program, and skews heavily towards people who have resources and can sign up for tutors in that space. So I think that that's a good thing, that that's not a required criteria for the applications, but personal statement is important, expressing your understanding, sustainability knowledge that you have coming into it. And, I'd say the background of applicants is broad. People come from the social sciences and the natural sciences. And all of those perspectives are valued in the programs.
Well, I'm really happy to hear about at least your programs shift away from the GRE, which is very exclusionary, and toward passion, right? That is so meaningful. I'm glad to hear that. And I just wanted to add that I think more and more universities are offering scholarships to students from the Global South, and a little bit of research might help you find some of those opportunities. Next question from the audience. What are some readings that someone just entering the field, I assume they mean the field of climate change, should do? Are there any basic authors or basic articles or books that they should look into?
That is a wonderful question. And I would actually direct you to some of like the intro courses on sustainable development that we offer. Those are public, those are on our website. You can like link directly to them because I think it's always changing, and the faculty who are teaching these courses are constantly updating it. So if someone wants to reach out to me, ping me on LinkedIn, I'd be happy to share some resources.
That's great, thank you. Next question is, what are some, sorry, reread that one. How are women empowered to study environmental policy? How would you encourage women to enter the field?
Good question. I think I would say don't follow my path, in the sense that, like, don't be afraid of math and science. Try it, and I think you can succeed. I think that there are, in these programs that at Columbia, there are more women than men quite often. So I think that women are, so we are represented here, so that there is a community to come into the space. And yeah, so I would say challenge yourself. Don't be afraid to take the hard quantitative courses. And even if you are, and you find that you lean more towards the social sciences, that's also a valuable space. And environmental policy, there's a science of the natural environment, but there's also the political side of it, and understanding people and how to influence people, and understanding institutions and how to navigate those. So I think that both perspectives are important.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, women are disproportionately affected by climate change. So we need those voices. We need it in academia and policy and in all the spaces. So
absolutely.
Don't be shy. Could you talk about your own experience about being a woman of color within academia and within the climate world? And do you have any advice you would give marginalized groups starting out?
Sure. I'd say that most of the rooms I am in are white and male, but that it's changing. There's been a concerted effort to diversify our workplace from students to administrators to faculty. I've seen the most progress on the staff level, and I'm hopeful that we start to see the results of recruitment efforts around new faculty hires and student applications. But, I've definitely experienced microaggressions. I've been mistaken for an intern. I've been casually asked to make a delivery for someone, and I didn't honestly know how to label those experiences until recently, but I can tell you that at the moment they made me feel really small. But generally, my personal experience has been positive, that those have not been the norm. And I work with really smart and amazing people who respect each other as people and as professionals. For folks looking to start out or enter the field, I'd say for I can speak from my experience in academia only, but for students, I'd say that everyone has a voice and has value to add in these conversations about climate change. Your lived experience may be different than others, but it matters. And so I think that it's important as students in places like Columbia to come, to speak, to have your voice heard, and to tap into resources and let people like faculty and staff know if you're struggling or if you need help. There's a network of people that are here to support you and that want to help students succeed. And they can help connect you to student affinity groups, to emergency financial resources, to food banks, to health support. So speak up and don't be shy. And also, if you're accepted to a program, always ask for more money. I wish I had known this as a grad student, but I think that you should always ask. The answer can be no, but the answer might be yes.
Yes, I think your point about reaching out to people either for help or to, tell people about microaggressions or being mistreated anyway is so important, right? Speak up, have a voice. This is my own question, would you have any advice for someone who experiences something like a microaggression just in real time to react to it?
Yeah, it's hard in the moment, right? Because you might not, like I didn't recognize it as such a thing. And it's just, so I think if you were able to, in the moment, to identify it and respond in a way that asserts who you are, and that's, maybe I'm not an intern, this isn't an appropriate ask for me, perhaps, that sort of thing. So, and if not, then, processing it on the back end is important. So reaching out to friends, family, mental health experts who might help you process that. And if it's in a place like a classroom environment or a work environment, then what are the steps that you can take internally to address that behavior with the person to ensure that that it doesn't happen again? Sometimes it's on purpose. Sometimes people are misinformed or uninformed and unaware of what they're doing and their own biases. And so I think that a conversation can sometimes help to, if not correct what happened, redirect for the future.
Right, absolutely. And it's important to remember that it was a mistake or shortcoming on the part of who made the inappropriate comment, not on the person receiving, right? It's not a judgment. It's not any sort of, anything to take to heart, even if it feels that way. Okay, back to our questions. What, from your point of view, is the state of the academic job market? And what would you want anyone considering academia as a career path to know?
I think that it's robust, as I mentioned, as universities expand their sustainability and climate curriculum, there is a need for people to teach in there. I would say there aren't enough diverse voices in the field. So if you're, I think I think the opportunities will increase for folks with different backgrounds who are not white and male within universities. I'd say, this is an interdisciplinary field, right? And so I think that there's a demand for people who have that interdisciplinary knowledge and applied research. So yeah, I don't know if that's a great answer to the question, but.
No, it's always good to hear that, yes, there are jobs for you within academia. Okay, another question for the audience. When applying to advanced degrees, we see publications, research experience, and things like that play a key role in the selection process. For activists and human rights defenders joining academia, would you say that work experience can be a substitute for publications to get selected?
I think it depends on the program, right? For the programs that, the Columbia's programs, I would say that the publications and research are not, the emphasis is not in that area. But I think for PhD programs, for specific graduate programs, particularly in the natural sciences, you might need that. And so for those, I'm not sure, I wouldn't be able to speak to whether activism and that sort of experience would be a substitute for it. I can speak to the interdisciplinary programs that don't require that, where I think that the advocacy and your experience would actually be a benefit and would make you a stronger applicant. It shows you're passionate, you understand the issues, and you're out there already doing the work.
Yeah, that's great. Again, I'm glad that passion is something that at least some universities are looking for and counts as a pro in your application process, because it can be so daunting. I'm going to reframe this question from the audience just a bit. Do you think that universities with climate programs prefer students with STEM backgrounds?
No, I don't think that they do. I don't think that they do. I think that these programs tend to be balanced in the natural and social sciences. If you come in without a natural science background, some of the courses may be more challenging for you at the outset. So I was speaking of one specific program that starts with a summer of science, and students take classes in environmental toxicology and hydrology, and really deep into the science, and that's challenging for people who come from a psychology or sociology background, but everybody helps each other, right? So the students who do have that strong science background are there to support their colleagues. And then in the fall, the emphasis switches to more management, social science, policy oriented courses, where now your strengths might shine, right? And where you might be helping people who are coming from the natural sciences. So I'd say that the area, these programs are very interdisciplinary, and both perspectives are valued.
That's great. I have one more question for myself that I think might be useful to some people. Would you recommend graduate degrees for people looking to enter the policy world or enter the non-academic world, I guess, more broadly?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, if you want to work in government, I think that depending on where you are in your career, sometimes growing up in that world is more beneficial, and a graduate degree might help you out to maybe reach like a senior executive level and give you the quantitative analytical management skills that are required for those jobs. So I think it really depends. I think it's a personal decision. I think starting as like an analyst and moving up is definitely doable and in the policy space, and you could be successful that way. But if you don't start there and you're a little more mid-career, perhaps a graduate degree could help you be more competitive.
Great, thank you. This has all been really helpful. I've learned a lot. I'm sure all of our audience members have gained so much. I believe those are all the questions we have from the audience. I'm going to make a couple of announcements here at the end, but if anyone wants to throw in a last question, I'm going to please encourage them to do that. But above all, I want to thank you, Natalie, for being here, for your time and your insights. This was very helpful for me personally, and I'm sure for everyone in our audience. So thank you so much. Thank you. And just to let everyone know, this will be recorded and we'll post it on our WCAPS website shortly. And if you have any topics, this is for our audience, if you have any topics you'd like the Climate Change Working Group to cover in the future, please feel free to drop topics in the chat box. You can also email us at ccwg@wcaps.org. We would really love to hear from everyone. Also in the chat box, we'll drop a link to our Climate Change Working Group listserv, so you can join our listserv and be aware of any upcoming events and publications. And I'd like to invite everyone to our next Climate Change Career Series, which will be with Dr. Stephen Hammer from the World Bank. That will be on December 7th at this time at 12 noon Eastern. And we'll drop registration details in the chat box as well. And again, if you join WCAPS General Listserv or our Climate Change Listserv, you'll get updates on that. And do we have any last questions? No, I think that's it. I think I'll give everyone their Friday afternoon off and enjoy. Maybe it's a day off for everyone here in the US, so maybe you have some plans. And thanks to everyone who joined us. And thank you, Natalie, again.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.